let's just shift our attention from the breath to just briefly contemplating our motivation. Our motivation for this class, also for our day, and for our week, and for our life. First we can bring to mind how everyone, all human and non-human beings, creatures, sentient beings, are exactly the same as ourselves in wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. My friends, but also strangers, also enemies, right? Everyone, they're all exactly the same in that way. They all totally want to be happy. Every second, actually. Right? Every second they're trying to avoid suffering. Even the people who do things I don't like, they're just doing those things because that's what they think will make them happy. So like deep down in their hearts, everyone's the same. From the leader of a country to a prisoner in jail, to an non-human cat or a dog, all the same in wanting to be happy, not wanting to Our hearts are all exactly the same. So already you can see, just logically, that in that basic context, that existential situation, to only work for my own happiness is not reasonable. But the purpose of life includes myself and all others, right? To do whatever I can to decrease suffering through compassion and to increase happiness through love and kindness. But then also, psychologically, when I am preoccupied with my own well-being, my own happiness, and ignore others' well-being, actually it only brings me problems. And being preoccupied with myself, right? Then I get annoyed with others, angry, jealous. Then they get annoyed back and all kinds of problems ensue. Relationship problems, problems between friends, problems between groups, even wars between nations. So many, all the fears, anxieties, preoccupations, sorrows, they all begin with that lack of recognition of my interdependence with others. The kind of self-preoccupation habit in my heart is the cause of all my suffering. So first of all, it's unreasonable right, to only think of my own welfare. Secondly, it actually causes, I think I'm going to find happiness that way. It actually causes me so much suffering. All the time that I worry, right? What do people think of me? How will they treat me? What will happen to me? Always like self-focused. Whereas when I open my heart, with love, with compassion, and kindness to others, it brings about welfare, the well-being of others, but also of myself. So loving kindness and compassion are the main sources of happiness in one's own heart. So then for sure, right, it's clear that self-preoccupation, complete, is actually my own worst enemy. It's not reasonable, it makes me problematic to others, and it causes all my own suffering in my heart. Whereas a life lived with love and compassion, cherishing others from my heart, immediately gives me so much peace. Creates a life full of meaning, full of positive connections, full of joy. A life of, continually creating positive karma. A life that brings happiness to others and also happiness to myself. So for sure, then, the purpose of my life is to live the life immersed in love and compassion. Letting myself totally be saturated in love and compassion. Radiating love and compassion. So the purpose of my whole life is that. The purpose of this day is that. The purpose of this next hour or two is that. And so we should contemplate, right? Commit in my heart to letting go of the inner enemy, self-preoccupation. And to live with a sense of empathy, kindness, compassion that embraces myself and all other beings. And the ultimate expression of compassion is striving to become enlightened to benefit all beings. Bodhicitta motivation. So then, today, I'll live with bodhicitta. Bringing happiness to myself and others through love and compassion. Let's come to the more interactive. This is the first class in the last module of Discovering Buddhism that we've been doing for a while. Introduction to Tantra. We're discussing Actually, so I wanted to start with just like this word, right? Like Tantra, there are synonyms, right? Tantra, if you read books, right? Vajrayana, sometimes you read, or secret mantra. Those are different like synonyms for a particular set of teaching. So one thing I want to start by just saying is that like this set of teachings, right, called Tantra or Vajrayana or secret mantra, like it's a very important point that they're not separate from Mahayana Buddhism, right? So it's like they're a subset in a way, or there's if you think of them as somehow separate from or different from Mahayana Buddhism, then you have misunderstand. Would be a wrong understanding. And so, in other words, the idea here is, right, in Mahayana Buddhism, one strives, right, the motivation is what we just contemplated, right, to strive for enlightenment for the welfare of all beings. Right? So when a Mahayana practitioner, right, generates that bodhicitta motivation grounded in love and compassion, and then they become a bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva is like an actual practitioner of Mahayana. It's funny, right? Sometimes we say, "Oh, I'm a Mahayana Buddhist," but actually, if our motivation is not bodhicitta, then that's not really true. Or same thing if you say I'm a Vajrayana Buddhist. Some people, I see on Facebook, some say religion Vajrayana Buddhist, Buddhist, which is okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying that. But in terms of actually, you could say, I don't know. There's a difference between like sort of my affiliation is with that, right? But then the true practitioner of that is somebody who's living with love and compassion and bodhicitta in their heart. Right? That's the real meaning of Mahayana. Right? Somebody who's doing that. So I just thought to explain first, so why, like, what's the difference then, right? Like, there's this idea that, so there's Mahayana Buddhism in general, right? And then within that, there's a subset of, like, if this is Mahayana Buddhism, right? Then there's a subset of people who are also practicing Vajrayana or Tantra. A subset of bodhisattvas, right? Or bodhisattva aspirants, who are practicing that Vajrayana. So you could ask, like, so what's the difference, right? Like, they're all cultivating love, they're all cultivating compassion, they're all cultivating bodhicitta, right? The wish to achieve enlightenment for all beings. So really, I think the main difference is this, one difference, there are a couple differences I want to get to, but from the point of view of the person, right, one difference is that in general, right, Mahayana, it says actually that in Mahayana Buddhism, that to go from being an ordinary person to achieving enlightenment for the welfare of all beings takes eons of time. It said that the Buddha took like 3 countless great eons. That's what it says in the teachings. Right? And there are other bodhisattvas who took longer. So then it said, right, that there are certain practitioners, certain bodhisattvas, who find it unbearable. Not for themselves. Dalai Lama often points that out. He says actually, if you think, oh, it's unbearable, I have to wait so long. That's not the idea. The idea is like the metaphor they sometimes use is some bodhisattvas, right? They look around and they see everyone like their mom. That's how bodhisattvas view people. Right? And it said that they feel like when they look at ordinary people, right? It doesn't matter who. Like, it's an important point. This would include like people suffering in some difficult war or famine. But this also includes like CEOs of corporations, presidents, actually, more for presidents or vice president. You have to have more compassion. But, it includes rich and poor, the worldly successful and worldly not successful. That when bodhisattvas look at beings, right, and also non-human, right, that they feel like it's like seeing their mother drowning in the ocean, right? Like their mother caught in a riptide drowning. So the idea, right, is that their compassion is so strong they can't bear it. Right? The idea, like, well, it's going to take me eons and I can't really do anything. Right? They say I have to help more quickly. It's unbearable to leave. For me, like, actually, the Dalai Lama often says, he says, the bodhisattva who's practicing Tantra would say something to himself, like, for myself, it's fine if it takes 3 countless great eons. It's no big deal, actually, right? Because I'm practicing the path, I'm doing positive things, but others aren't. Right? In other words, they're drowning. And so for me to take that long is not bearable, right? You can imagine that, right? Like, in other words, if you were, how that would feel, right? Like if you think, that a parent or your only child is dying, right? You can't just wait around. You can't say, oh, there'll eventually be a cure. Problem, right? You feel it has to be a cure. Now, that's the difference, right? Like everybody wants a cure for cancer or some other disease, right? But then if somebody you love is dying, then you feel like there has to be a cure faster. It's not fast enough, right? So like some bodhisattvas have this extremely powerful sense of compassion, actually, right? Where they feel like it's totally unbearable for others to suffer for so long, even though it's fine if it takes me that long. I can't bear others waiting, right? And so then it said they such bodhisattvas search for a method to more quickly achieve enlightenment for the welfare of others. And it said that that's what this Vajrayana or Tantra is. So it's the faster vehicle, the quicker path, the faster path to enlightenment. So then you might ask, well, why don't all bodhisattvas do that? If it's faster, why doesn't everybody do it? Especially for Americans, it's actually the fastest, McDonald's or something like that. But actually, there are a couple of reasons. One is actually finding the tantric teachings is very difficult. You say it doesn't exist many places. Second is it's more difficult to practice at the beginning. In other words, it becomes easy to practice at a certain point, but it's more maybe a better way to say it is the faster path is also a more dangerous path where you can make mistakes. So that's another reason why practice is yeah, and actually I want to say that too, actually, like the rarity of Tantra. Like it said, actually, for example, I'm just sharing Buddhist perspective on this, but it said that there are 1,000 Buddhas of this eon, right, according to Buddhism. The Buddha's fourth, right? Yeah. Fourth Buddha. And it said that there are different debates, I think, but some teachers say that this Buddha is the only of those 1,000 who definitely would teach Tantra. Others say maybe one other or two others will. It's not definite. Like one or two others might. I always thought this was nice. I'll just share it. I always like this story that I think it was the first Panchen Lama, Losang Choki Gyaltsen, said that I thought this was funny because so many people actually, like many Mahayana Buddhists, pray to be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. And if you go, especially in East Asia, that's a very common practice, right? But also some Tibetans too. Many Buddhists throughout, like Japan, China, Vietnam, Korea, pray to be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. Which is a pure land. So that the idea is, if you get reborn there, then you'll definitely eventually become enlightened. Right? You won't fall down again. You'll practice the path. But the first Panchen Lama said actually that there were some bodhisattvas in Amitabha's Pure Land who have extremely strong compassion, who are praying to be reborn on this earth, right? Because there's no tantra there, so they'll get enlightened, but not as quickly. Right? So like the people he was thinking, so the people here are praying to be reborn there, but then the most compassionate bodhisattvas there are praying to be reborn here, because here it's faster. Also, there's more suffering here, so it's compassion can get really powerful. You actually are most immersed in suffering here, right? You're surrounded by it. So the tantras here and also the suffering here have some kind of, speed of our practice. Right? So it's like, in a way, it's like, another way I think of this, I was saying earlier about, one is the strength of the compassion, but also there's a certain bravery involved in practicing tantric path. But next thing I wanted to say is this, so then for us, right, maybe some of you here are such bodhisattvas, maybe you're on this planet because you prayed. You must have actually. But then I wanted to say, in terms of, on a practical level, right, then there are certain prerequisites to practicing Tantric Buddhism. So actually, if you're practicing Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism, one prerequisite obviously you have to be Buddhist to practice Tantric Buddhism. That's obvious, right? Which means have taken refuge, right? But then many times Tibetan lamas will say there are three other things one needs, right? And some lamas will equate that from the three principal aspects of the path, the text by Lama Tsongkhapa, right? So those three qualities, or three things one has to either sometimes Science Dialogue will say, ideally one will have realized these three things, but at least one has to be familiar with them and have an appreciation in one's heart. Not just like an intellectual appreciation, but a kind of heartfelt appreciation. Right? So one is renunciation. The second one is bodhicitta, which we were just talking about. And then the third is some understanding of emptiness. And you'll see as we talk about, tantric path, that actually, if you don't have some degree of those three things, then you can't really, as we say it. First of all, then tantric practice won't work. It may make things worse, not better. And I want to talk a little about why. But so I want to say a comment first. So I want to go through those three just briefly. Okay. First one, renunciation. Some people would say, and actually some people in Tibet before, like early on in Tibetan history, when Tantra was first coming to Tibet, totally misunderstood this idea of renunciation. They thought, because there are teachings in Tantra which we're going to explain in a little while, discuss like about, what's it called? Taking desire into the path to enlightenment. Right? And so then people thought, well, if you're taking desire into the path, then who needs renunciation? You want desire. Right? Which was a wrong understanding, actually. Right? And Lama Yeshe, I thought in one of his books, he said something on Tantra, one of his books on Tantra, he says actually you have to have more renunciation to practice Tantra. So what does that mean, actually, right? So we have to go back and say, what is renunciation? Because you have to, in other words, with Tantra, right, it's important to really clarify the meaning of it. Because renunciation doesn't mean living in a cave, right? Renunciation doesn't mean not having a house or car or clothing or something, right? That's not the meaning of renunciation. Right? Renunciation means, right, what does it mean if somebody has renunciation, right? It means they understand how their own mind works. And they understand how getting caught in craving and grasping leads them to suffer. Right? They understand how getting caught in projections based on ignorance causes them to suffer. Right? And so, like, renunciation is actually really, the real meaning of renunciation is in the level of the mind. Right? So renunciation means you understand how your mind creates suffering and its causes, and you're renouncing that. Right? So the question then, right? Like, so the point here is this. Actually, is think about it this way. Right? A person, like, actually, a person can be in a nice house and be completely caught up in craving and desire. A person can be in the middle of the woods and also be caught up completely in craving and desire. Right? So it's not the location, it's the mind of the person, right? A person can be totally alone, right? It's very easy to see this, right? You can say, renunciation means you sit alone somewhere, right? But if a person's alone thinking, I wish I had friends, my life sucks, why is my life like, well, that's not, whereas a person, and the same thing, right? If you're around a lot of people and you think, what does everybody think of me, and how do they, that's not renunciation, right? Right, so renunciation, whether the person's alone or with other people, right, what they're doing is they're training their mind to let go of grasping and attachment, right, to what others think of them, to what their status is, to what their reputation is, right? There was renunciations on the level of the mind. Does that make sense? And so you can see now that actually to practice any form of Mahayana Buddhism, particularly Tantra, we're trying to transform experiences into the path to enlightenment, that if you're preoccupied with your reputation, your fame, your wealth, your status, then you're not practicing. You're not practicing any kind of dharma, much less Vajrayana. So really, what's important here, and like, I'll say one other brief story. Like, this is part of the reason they invited the kings of Tibet, right? Zhang Chubo, king of Tibet, invited Atisha to Tibet, right? Because actually in Tibet, people had this wrong. There were people back then who were like, they thought, I'm practicing Tantra, and they thought, like monasticism doesn't matter, and renunciation doesn't matter, and they were, drinking and partying a lot and thinking they were practicing Tantra. And so the king realized that was like a totally degenerate form of Buddhism, so he invited Atisha, a great scholar, to Tibet. And Atisha clarified those people were misreading Tantric texts. Right? They read some words in the text and didn't understand the actual meaning. And so they were completely practicing wrongly. And what Atisha pointed out, right, is what we're talking about, that correct tantric practice is grounded in these practices of renunciation, of understanding the preciousness of human life, of ethics, of morality, right, and of not following negative, afflictive emotions. And actually, what you'll see when we get to talking about Tantra, that what Tantra actually does is it gives you some unusually skillful methods for how to transform your afflictive emotions. It's not to cultivate afflictive emotions or sit and dwell in them, it's to transform them into wisdom, actually. Right? So it's a complete misunderstanding to think, oh, I can just be angry, and that's Tantra. I can, what's the word, focus my life on just my own enjoyments or pleasure, and that's Tantra. That's a misunderstanding. Right? So renunciation is important. And then bodhicitta, right? So we already said, right, the whole motivation for practicing Tantra is bodhicitta. That's the purpose of it. And so there is no such thing as, because Tantra is a form of Mahayana Buddhism that we're studying here. So if you're not cultivating bodhicitta, then already you're out. We said, right, if this is Mahayana, then this is the tantric part of Mahayana, right? So if you're not cultivating bodhicitta, you're outside the first circle, you're certainly not in the second, right? So there's no way to practice Tantra without a familiarity with bodhicitta. So that's clear. And then some understanding of emptiness, right? So they say, the best practitioner of Tantra will have realized bodhicitta and realized emptiness, but at least to have some understanding and appreciation, that one actually practices meditation on emptiness and has studied emptiness. And you'll see as we get into what Tantra is, in a couple of minutes actually, that it's totally impossible actually to practice what Tantra actually is without some basic understanding of emptiness at least. Your understanding can improve over time, but you'll see as we get into it that what Tantra is all about is integrating your understanding of emptiness into daily life. So if you don't have any understanding of emptiness, how can you integrate that into daily life, and then you're not practicing it? Okay, so I just wanted to, so those are like prerequisites. And I'll say another thing, just to make this clear. So to actually begin tantric practice, right? Like you could there are certain very basic, I don't know what the word is, things borrowed from Tantra that people that were like this class or we'll be discussing. But then to really engage in the actual practice of Tantra, you have to take what's called either a initiation or empowerment. Like an empowerment is like a translation usually of Wam, Tibetan word, and then the other is like a blessing, like it's a Jainam. From a lama, from a guru, from a teacher, a tantric master. Right? So in other words, you can't, I want to clarify that too, so that's another prerequisite to really practice Tantra. Again, there are some practices like introductory practices to Tantra that you can sort of start to engage in to get a sense of Tantra, but to really practice you have to take an initiation from a qualified teacher of that tradition. Like this Holiness Dalai Lama, for example, gives Kala Chakra initiation often, or many lamas give different initiations. And usually when a lama gives an initiation, they'll say at the beginning, right, well, you have to have some familiarity with renunciation, bodhicitta, view of emptiness. And even during the initiations, usually you have to take refuge and the Bodhisattva vow, or almost any. Right, so that's already, the fact that you have to take those, especially the Bodhisattva vow, right, implies bodhicitta is an inherent part of Tantra. And I wasn't planning to talk about this, but actually I will say a little bit. So I want to say too, just because, again, this is introduction, people may not know, so I want to explain just a little bit about that. So the idea really is, first of all, we went through this in one of the earlier modules, right, that actually to practice Mahayana Buddhism well, one needs a teacher, right? But in Tantra, it's even more clear. I don't know if it could be more clear, because it's so clear in Mahayana Buddhism in general, but in Tantra, it's totally impossible. In other words, without a guru to give some kind of initiation, you're not really practicing. So you can't just read a book. Right? You can't just go buy a book on Tantra and read it and think, oh, now I'm practicing Tantra. You need to establish a relationship with the teacher, at least to some extent. Right? How close a relationship is up to you and the teacher, but like for example, if His Holiness Dalai Lama gives a Kala Chakra, it's not that you're going to hang out with His Holiness and have lots of hours and hours of discussion. but that qualifies as taking initiation. And is it okay, up to now I've been sharing like actual, specifically, what the teachings say. Is it okay if I want to share like a couple of personal reflections now related to that, just to think about it together. Because at the beginning, I said, early on, what's there to say, that the tantric path is faster, right? A faster path to enlightenment. But I said it's also more dangerous. And so I want to say a couple of things about that, right? Because, so, one of the unique features of Tantra, which we're going to get into in more detail, is deity yoga. So visualizing yourself as a deity, right? Others as deities, and the environment as a mandala, pure land. And so, if one has renunciation, bodhicitta, and a correct understanding of emptiness to some extent, and one has a teacher, those are protections, actually. Because if somebody just imagine if somebody doesn't have particularly compassion, right, or bodhicitta, right, or they have a little bit, they don't have an understanding of emptiness, and they don't have a teacher, right? And then imagine they say, I read a book and I want to start visualizing myself as a deity, right? Well, what are the dangers of that? Actually, it doesn't take that one. Now, again, these are just, I'm going off for a moment just into contemplating together, thinking about, right? Actually, grandiosity is a danger, right? Oh, I'm so great. Oh, I'm so special. Thinking that one is somehow more important than somebody else, right? Or thinking one is better than somebody else, or thinking one is very special, or something like that, right? Which, all those are pride, right? They actually go against the spirit of compassion and bodhicitta. So it's totally, you can see how, without the prerequisites, those prerequisites are not like, they're not like, they're protections to us. Does that make sense? Like that's the teachers trying to help us understand how to not hurt ourselves, right? Because the tantric methods, if you think of it, they're like powerful, but if you use them in the wrong way, whatever, like anything, like, it's like electricity or something, right? Like, Mike was recently working on electricity, and he does it very carefully, But imagine if someone like me was going to start working on electricity, I'd end up, dead, I think. And in a way, Tantra is similar, right? It's something that's powerful, but if you don't approach it in the right way, right, then you wind up worse off than when you started. If you do approach it in the right way, with these prerequisites and with the guidance of a teacher, then it becomes a fast path to enlightenment. And so this idea of the idea of a teacher, a guru or something. I just want to say something brief about that. One is, I went over this in detail there was a whole module on the spiritual teacher, but I just want to say a couple of quick things. Because here in the West, and it's the same, I don't know, I think the same thing sometimes happens other places, but, you get flyers or something, right, or emails, or you see on whatever, so-and-so's giving this initiation, and that person's giving that, and somebody's giving 12 initiations in a certain town, and then they're leaving town or something. And I'm not criticizing that. The center does that too, but I want to say a couple of things. One is, so if you take a tantric initiation from a teacher, from a guru, from whoever's giving it, from the Mahayana Buddhist perspective, you're establishing what's called like a commitment with that person, or a connection with that person that's very important, is very powerful. And so, one advice I just wanted to give, this is my personal advice, is research before you go to something like that. Okay? Like don't just, don't say, oh, that initiation sounds cool, I'm going to go, and then just go without knowing, first of all, who's the person, are they somebody I want to establish? That, in a way, like, I sometimes think this way, like, I don't know if I said this in that module, but, like, choosing a tantric teacher is a bit like choosing a spouse. Like, it's that important in a way. Actually, from a Mahayana Buddhist perspective, they say it's more important because it goes to future lives. When you do marriage vow, you say until death do us part. But in a tantric initiation, it's not. It's until enlightenment. Actually, you don't even part at enlightenment. At enlightenment, you sort of merge. You ultimately merge with your teacher. So you're establishing a relationship with that person that goes from now through all your future lifetimes. Is the idea, right? And so you want to be really careful then, right? Like, in other words, I don't think people think that way. That this is more important than who I marry. I don't think that's how people think when they go to an initiation. Because people hopefully put a fair amount of thought into who they marry. But we should put that much thought, at least, into who we choose as a spiritual tantric teacher. Because particularly in Mahayana like you're taking the Bodhisattva vow, and then you're taking certain, what they call samayas, which are like commitments in relation to that person. Vows, just like, that's why I'm giving the metaphor of marriage, right? In a marriage you take vows, and in a tantric ceremony you take vows in relation to a person. So you want to really be sure that that's a person who you want to be connected to in that way. And even if they're just coming to town and leaving, right? There's a subtle connection now between you and that person that will go from lifetime to lifetime. Yeah. And so if you take, and so I'm saying this partly because it says this in the teachings actually, but also I've seen this happen with people where somebody like, what's the word? They took, they just went, oh cool, I need empowerment, I'm going to go, and they went, and then later, they found out things about that person, right? That the person was not ethical in certain ways, and was deceitful, or was trying, sort of manipulate people to get something, that kind of thing. And then it's like a nightmare, actually, right? Like, it's like, well, and it's like, it's like a bad marriage. If you marry somebody and then you find out they're beating you and abusing, hitting you and all that, right? And then you're stuck in a way. It's a big hassle. And you're like, well, this is similar. So I just want to say, you should do research. And His Holiness Dalai Lama says that, he says it's our responsibility. He says it's as much, he says, His Holiness often, I've heard His Holiness, actually he's great in the sense of being, I don't know any other tradition where he's so critical. I mean, when I don't know if everybody's seen him, when sometimes he's on the stage and he'll say, and there are a few people here who I don't think are doing right, and he'll start criticizing them. He's very openly. But then he says also, so His Holiness is very open about criticizing when somebody's not being ethical. But at the same time, His Holiness points out, as students, it's also our responsibility not to be like hero worshipping and just say, oh, somebody has a big title. If it says like in the ad, right, whatever, some big words, and you say, oh, wow, cool. Like, that's not the basis for deciding who's a teacher, right? It's that you have to check, is the person ethical? Or do they practice morality? Are they compassionate? Are they patient? And so on, right? So I just want to say that, and so don't, I'm not saying don't take empowerments initiations, but really do your research. That's your responsibility. Does that make sense? I'll share one other, this is my, again, I'm going off into my personal thoughts on this topic. But I'll say so sometimes it's hard to check also on a teacher, especially if somebody's just coming to town for a little while, but there are two, one is you can check some on the internet, of course. For me, I over the years, what I sometimes tend to do is I cheat. And what I mean by cheat is this, is if I don't have time and ability to check up on somebody very thoroughly, then if, for example, if His Holiness the Dalai Lama is checked up, I trust that, or if Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of my teachers who's a very wonderful teacher, if he took somebody as his teacher, I know he knows a ton about other Tibetan Lamas, so I figure, okay, he does all the research. And actually I've heard him talk about this, where he goes through a whole process where he checks, there are lists of 30 qualities that an ideal tantric teacher should have. And sometimes, one time I was with Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Reba Rinpoche, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche went through and showed how Reba Rinpoche had all 30 of the qualities. He had checked already. So I thought, okay, that's good. So then he did the research for you. I'm not saying you have to, you may not be a student of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but I'm just giving you an example of so there are two ways. One is check yourself, or the other is, check if you can figure out that one person is truly trustworthy, and then and they say they're studying with somebody or someone, and it's an easy way to check on person. But does it make sense that we have a responsibility to check that? Because I just don't, it really is a bad situation. I've met people who are, then they're all it disturbs the mind so much in their life if they chose a teacher and then the teacher was being abusive or something, like that. So be really, I just wanted to say that. I guess another thing too is also to practice Tantra you need empowerment, right? But you don't have to have 1,000 empowerments either, whereas you can have, in other words, if you want to practice a particular practice, there are different empowerments for different deities, like Tara, Buddha Samaja, White Tara, and so on. So you need that particular empowerment to practice that particular thing, but, you don't have to practice 500 different deities either, right? So, you can choose which teacher and also choose which practices you want to practice, and you focus on that, and that's good. Okay, that's all, just like warning or something. But does it make sense? Also, I just want to ask you, like, does it make sense that there could be, like, well, actually, I want to go over what deity yoga is, okay? And then I'll ask this question. So let's go through what is deity. So, actually, in his Lama Tsongkhapa, who's pictured there, in his text called the Great Treatise on the Stages of Secret Mantra, right? He actually talks about what's the unique feature of Tantra that makes it different than other forms of Mahayana Buddhism. What's the dividing line that makes something uniquely Tantric? Which is a good question, right? And he entertains various ideas that other people have said, and then finally, what Lama Tsongkhapa says pretty clearly there, very clearly in that text, is that there are many unique features to Tantra, but that the real, the main one, you could say, or the main unique feature that differentiates, the Tantric teachings, is this practice of deity yoga. And so, and then within deity yoga, there are many you can find thousands of different kinds of practices, but this general category of deity yoga, I want to talk about it. Right, so actually, so it's not just visualization, right? Because even you guys know this from other modules, right? There are times where in non-tantric teachings you visualize the Buddha there in front of you, right? Or you visualize Tara in front of you. You pray to Tara, right? But in deity yoga, there's a unique practice. I want to explain what that is, okay? And it's totally unique to Tantra. And it's this. This is why, now you're going to see why you have to understand emptiness some, or you can't practice Tantra. Is what you do is, right, let's say, in meditation, right, through a sadhana. A sadhana is like a set, a series of meditations written out, and sometimes it can be explained orally, actually, it doesn't have to be written, usually, but nowadays they're almost all written. But it's a series of practices. Usually it begins with taking refuge, generating love and compassion, generating bodhicitta, and then there comes a point, right, where what happens is, right, so you're meditating, and you meditate on the emptiness of your self, right, or of your own mind, of yourself, of your person. And remember we talked about this, when you meditate on the emptiness, for example, of any object, but in this case yourself, right? So you bring up the object of negation, right? The seeming, the appearance, and then the belief in a truly existent, inherently existent self, right? And then you use reasoning, right, to refute the existence of such an object, right? Until what appears to the mind, right, is a mere negation, right? A negation of that truly existent, inherent, solid, permanent, but inherently existent self. Let's leave it like that, right? So then what appears to your mind is just they call it a non-affirming negation, right? But it means everything dissolves, in a sense. All ordinary appearances dissolve at that point. And again, it's to varying degrees. Somebody who's fully realized emptiness, they literally dissolve and nothing appears. But even for us, right, you kind of have this sense of you are holding on to a truly existent self. You meditate on its emptiness, and then it sort of dissolves, right? That the appearance ceases as you realize it's not real, right? Doesn't exist, and then there's a kind of vacuity that appears, or an emptiness. That's why it's called emptiness, right? So you're meditating now on emptiness, right? In this sadhana, in this series of meditations. Now this is the unique feature. This is a unique feature, or the most important unique feature of Tantra, is when you're not practicing Tantric Buddhism, right? You meditate on emptiness, and then eventually you get distracted, or you get tired, right? And then you think, okay, you get up and go about your day, right? You think, that was cool, whatever. Glad I meditated on emptiness, now I'm going to go eat lunch. In Tantric Buddhism, you do something else. It's a skillful method, right? So what happens is, right, that mind understanding emptiness, right, then this is the deity yoga part. Through a series of, sometimes visualizing a lotus and a moon, there are a series of meditations, but in essence, that mind understanding emptiness then arises in the imagined form of the deity. Let's say Tara, for example. Right? So now, right, if you're practicing Tantra, what's happened is, right, the mind understanding emptiness, so not something else, right? It's not some other idea. It's the mind that understands emptiness is now sort of is now taking a form as Tara. Right? So Tara is, first of all, is not, in this case, right, if you're visual, I'm just picking Tara as the example, Tara is not separate from your own mind then, right? But it's your mind, which was understanding emptiness, or is understanding emptiness, is now sort of taking the aspect of Tara, right? With, in this case, it would be like with two arms and green in color, or white in color, depending which Tara you practice, right? Or other, there's red Tara and yellow Tara. But let's take white Tara as the example, right? So, right, so you dissolved into emptiness, right? then you imagine that wisdom understanding emptiness arising as a white lotus, right? And then on that lotus is a moon cushion. On that moon cushion is her seed syllable, Tam. And then you visualize that Tam transforms into Tara. Right? And so now, right, you're visualizing this form of Tara, right, white Tara with like she has 7 eyes. Here, one here, one on the sole of her feet, on each sole, and she's holding a lotus and so on, right? Now you're visualizing, so there's no appearance of an ordinary, right, like, right, so like if Fidel sat down to meditate, right? When he sat down, there was an appearance of ordinary, this is me, Fidel. Okay, meditate, right? But then he dissolved his ordinary appearance, right, into emptiness. So now, Fidel is, I'm imagining it's you, right? Fidel is cultivating a new appearance, right? As a white Tara, with crown and earrings and a female deity, right? Holding this and sitting on a lotus in a pure land, right? And then, right, so then what happens actually, right? Then I want to be clear about something. Does that mean if it's that a person who's doing this doesn't still, what's the word? If they're going to go make lunch, that they don't see the refrigerator? No, obviously not, right? That they don't have hands, they don't see their own hands. It's a mental training, right? Does that make sense? Or is this a mental training that one is doing, right? So while going about one's day, right, one is remembering, one is cultivating a different kind of mindfulness now, right? This is not mindfulness of breathing, this is a different kind of mindfulness, right? A mindfulness of the pure appearance and concept, right? So they're cultivating this appearance, I'm Tara. Right? And, how do I say this right? Like, so then repeatedly, right, as they're visualizing the hands, right, and the body of Tara, they're remembering this is the wisdom of emptiness, right? That based on the parts of Tara, there's a mere label, Tara, but there's no inherently existent Tara, right? And also Tara, the visualization, she's made of light, right? She's not a solid being. And so that visualization of her being, translucent and made of light is another reminder, right? There's the appearance, but it's empty from its own side, right? And they're bringing to mind over and over again how the eye and all the environment are empty from their own side, right? And so then there's both this appearance, right? So there's pure appearance into the mind, right? A visualization or an imagined, you can say imagined or visualized, same thing in this context, right? Of this kind of deity form, right? And then there's a pure concept, right? So one thing, whereas externally one is still saying, hi, I'm Jodi, right, or whatever. But internally one is cultivating what they call divine pride, right? This idea of I'm Tara, the result time Buddha, who works for the welfare of all sentient beings equally with great compassion, right? There's an inner training like that. Which, and one thinks, right, I'm the expression of the wisdom understanding emptiness. First I want to pause now, right, so that I'm just giving an intro, that's deity yoga, right? And then one is going around one's day, and one's cultivating this inner training of I'm Tara, visualizing this deity made of light, radiating light rays, and enjoying pure pleasures and pure, instead of drinking water or tea, right, if it's Tara, one is drinking nectar. One is drinking nectar, not ordinary tea. One is not wearing ordinary clothes, one is wearing divine silks, right, made of emptiness, wisdom. Right? One's clothes are made of wisdom, understanding, emptiness. One's house, one's mandala, right, is an expression of the wisdom, understanding, emptiness, and bodhicitta. Right? This is the mental training one is doing. So now I want to pause, right? And I want to go back to what I was saying earlier. Like, so first of all, does it make sense that there is without an understanding of emptiness, actually you can't, right? Now if somebody said, I never read anything about emptiness, I never really studied emptiness, but I'm going to practice deity yoga. Well, how do you do that? In other words, the whole point is you've dissolved ordinary appearances into emptiness, and then emptiness wisdom has arisen as the deity, right? So if you don't have any even beginning of understanding of emptiness, then how can you do that? You can't, right? So it's not possible. You see what I mean? Now earlier I said one prerequisite is bodhicitta, that's clear, right? You can't even take the initiation without bodhicitta, taking the bodhisattva vow, and also the very beginning of the practice is bodhicitta. But you see how if you don't have some basic understanding of emptiness, at least a starting point, then you can't do that practice, right? There's no way. So you can see why that's a prerequisite. Now, does it mean you have to have realized emptiness? No, but at least you have to have some understanding. And do you see how for somebody who has, at least, if you've cultivated, if you're studying and meditating on emptiness, then if you're doing this, it's going to bring that contemplation of emptiness into daily life more, right? Because you're repeatedly reminding yourself now, oh, I'm the expression of emptiness, merely labeled on the parts, totally empty from its own side. The appearing deity, which is empty, so you see how in other words, then it's going to just sort of reinforce your earlier meditations on emptiness. But do you see it makes sense, right? That if you don't have some understanding of emptiness, some appreciation, then there's no such thing as practicing deity yoga. So I want to go back to a second thing. In a minute I want to talk about the benefits of such a practice, right? Because you may say, why bother doing that? It seems like it's a little difficult at the beginning. But I want to go back and first of all talk about the deity. So like, do you see how if somebody just read a book and started doing that without a familiarity with bodhicitta, without a familiarity with emptiness and renunciation, and without a teacher, do you get a sense of how that could not be healthy? Right? Does that make sense? Like, there is that just to sort of start saying I'm something I'm not.
Yeah, like doubt.
What's that?
Like doubt.
Yeah, one is doubt.
I'm doubting.
Yeah, you say, what does it mean?
Why do you know what?
Yeah, why would I want to do that?
Yeah.
Also, I'm not really that. Right? And then either one becomes confused, right? That's one possibility. A person could get confused. Or another possibility is a person could be grandiose and think they're something, whatever. But you can see there are dangers there, right? And so now I want to say a little bit, so this is why, for sure one has to have the three principal aspects of the path, familiarity, and for sure one has to have a teacher, right? Because one of the aspects of deity yoga, actually, usually as a phrase now, I want to add another term to that. In the Guru Puja, right? It says, actually he says, the Pancha Lama says Guru Deity Yoga, which is actually a more profound phrase to me. Because there, actually what one is visualizing, right, one receives the initiation of Tara, right? If one's doing that practice, one receives the initiation of Tara, let's say from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right? He often gives that initiation, as many lamas do. So now, actually, one receives the initiation from His Holiness, right? I'm giving that as the example. So now, one's cultivating, I want to give talk about the mental training here. So one is thinking, this appearance of me as Tara is an expression of emptiness, wisdom, understanding emptiness. What is that wisdom, understanding emptiness? That's the Dalai Lama, actually, right? In other words, that's the real meaning of the Dalai Lama, of guru, of teacher, right? And it is not, in other words, the Dalai Lama is a person, right? But one thinks, what is the ultimate meaning of teacher? In Buddhism, it's the wisdom, understanding emptiness. That whether that appears in somebody else's mind or in my mind, that's the ultimate guru. Right? So in a sense, there's also this practice of guru yoga, right? Which means that white Tara is also not separate from my teacher. Right? So in other words, if I'm visualizing myself as white Tara, right, there's this sense of this is an expression of the wisdom, understanding emptiness. That wisdom, understanding emptiness is the ultimate nature of the Dalai Lama. Right? So I'm visualizing myself as somehow, yoga means union, so I'm visualizing myself also as in union with the Dalai Lama in some sense, right? Mixed, my mind and his mind mixed together, kind of like that. So actually, I want to ask you, I want to pause and just ask you guys a question. First of all, does that sound, the practice, does it sound? What's your reaction actually? So this idea of deity, I want to explain the benefits in a minute of why a person would do that, because this is introduction to Tantra, so we're trying to understand what is Tantra and why would somebody do that. But what's your initial reaction? Does it seem difficult? Does it seem, I don't know.
I just think you'd have to be truly grounded in Oriental Buddhism.
Yeah.
That's my initial.
It really makes sense, doesn't it? You can see why now you have to be grounded.
Really study.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah, you see this is not a practice to do at the beginning. Right? Because if you try to do it at the beginning when you're not familiar with those other things, you'll just get confused. You can see how a person would get confused, right? If one is starting to do this before one has really meditated a lot on emptiness or bodhicitta, it would just be like overwhelming, right? To a person who hasn't grounded themselves.
Yeah, it would be, I'm not, meaningless is the wrong word, but, I mean, it could almost be like a blank experience because you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, move into something negative, which is why they're more dangerous.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Yeah, and what you're hinting at, I think I just want to elaborate on just a little bit, is like, I think it's true in all cultures, that there's sometimes a tendency to want to, I think it's, actually, it may be worse in our culture, like, this idea of, like, I want the best,
yeah.
or the highest, thing. And in this case, that's not a good approach, I mean, ultimately to want the highest thing is okay, but to rush to to rush to the highest before one has done the preliminary can be backwards, and cannot work. So, if one has an aspiration to, actually, I think in some ways there's a positive aspect, like, whereas if one is aspiring to practice Tantra, right, because one knows it's a fast path to enlightenment, if that makes one say, okay, then I really want to practice renunciation, bodhicitta, and the wisdom understanding emptiness, and I want to make more effort so I can be a qualified practitioner of that. That's like a good example. And then, and then slowly, progress. In other words, then it becomes a very useful. And then at a certain point, like one, one, like I think at the beginning it's just an aspiration. Then maybe somebody takes it in initiation, but they're still emphasizing those earlier practices. Doing a little bit of that, and then slowly, it starts to, one can do more and more. I think that's a healthier approach.
I don't know if I'm getting the right way, but like I can see maybe also ego being a pitfall. I feel like you're trying to attend more, but especially if you're not prepared,
Right.
you don't grasp the concept.
Yeah, I completely agree, right. It could make your ego even more strong, in a way, if you're doing it in the wrong order, in the wrong way. Again, because it's grounded in the understanding of emptiness, if you're doing it correctly, it undermines egotism, right? But if you don't have a good understanding of that, then you can see how it can increase that, right? You can think, oh, I'm doing, actually they say that's one of the issues they talk about in the tradition, that sometimes people make this mistake where they think, oh, I'm practicing this, and so those people who aren't are not as good as me. I mean, if somebody has that kind of, somebody who's practicing a lower practice isn't as good as that means the person's totally right, doing exactly what you're describing, where it's like there's a metaphor for this. They say, where medicine becomes a poison, right? The idea is that this is supposed to be a medicine to cure self-cherishing and self-grasping and self-centeredness. But if one does it in the wrong order and the wrong way, it actually what should have been a medicine to cure the problem of egotism becomes a poison that increases egotism. And that's dependent on one's own mind, right? In other words, it's not, it's if one does that out of order, or one doesn't follow the sequence in a reasonable way, and also doesn't. And again, if you have the other thing I'll say is also if you have a qualified teacher, this is another benefit, right? Because then you can ask, right? Like that's another great thing. If you have someone, again, like, someone like Yubei Khenpo comes to the center. I've seen many times where people come to him and they ask, they'll say, do this practice and do that, emphasize this now. And so if you have that kind of guidance, right, then also you can, somebody, because that's also the quality, that's also a benefit to having a teacher like that, is, I'll say just, this is again not, I'm just sharing experience, but my own experience, but also watching, because Khenpo stayed with me, so sometimes I would see, people would share I'm not sharing any private thing, but I'll say, like, I've seen both sides. I've seen some people who are too insecure, and then, like, a qualified teacher will say, no, do this practice, something that seems to them more advanced, and then it was, like, helpful to them. And I've seen the opposite, where somebody wants to do the highest, and then, and they think, and then, then Lama Zopa or Khenpo or a qualified teacher will say, no, spend a long time doing this. You can see the person, oh, I thought I could get through the high. And both happen. But the point is that's another benefit of the teacher is that, because one is you have to check for yourself. There are two main checks on oneself, right? One is one's own introspection to say, am I ready to do this? Do I have some understanding of bodhicitta and so on? But then the other is if you can establish a relationship, and again, you don't have to hang out for hours and hours, but if you're interested in Tantra, right, you can go. I remember the very first time, I'll just share a personal story. I remember the first time I was thinking to take an initiation, it was from this wonderful, great teacher who's since passed away. I remember I went to him and I said, I'm not qualified. Should I come anyway? And we had a discussion about it. And, at that time, his advice to me on that particular time was, come for the future, but you're not going to really practice this yet because you're not qualified. You're right, but he said, but it's good for us to have that connection, so come, and later you'll do the practice or something. And that was helpful to me because I knew I wasn't qualified. So sometimes, and he wasn't somebody I spent a ton of time with, but it's a good idea sometimes to go and ask the question. That's the other, because there's, and especially if the teacher's that teacher was the teacher to Lama Zopa and the Dalai Lama, so I felt, okay, I really trust. The Dalai Lama had chosen as the teacher, so I thought, okay, I totally trust any advice. And his advice was perfect, But my point is so that's another way to check on the ego, is to ask, Because again, some people, some people want to rush to the most high, right, and having a teacher, both checking yourself, but also asking. But the other is, there are people, a lot of times sometimes a person can be too insecure. They, I'm not, I'm not good enough, and I'm not this, and I'm not, and then having somebody who can encourage you and say, no, you are, no, you are ready. Try this. Push yourself a little beyond what you think you're ready or what you're capable of. You're capable of more than you think. That can also be a great gift, actually. So again, these are qualities of a good teacher, and why it's useful to have, not useful, necessary to have that kind of guidance at times. Because again, we can't totally. This is why, especially in Vajrayana, you can't totally. There's you need that guidance from outside sometimes, of somebody who's realized those teachings, and therefore they know, which sequence and so on to do things in as well. So that I agree with that about the ego. Yeah, actually, I'll say that too. I'm going to add one more comment on this about the ego. Just this is my own reflection. Although, actually, Lama Zopa said this sometimes. What does Lama Zopa say? He says sometimes Lama Zopa will joke. He'll say, "Are you a disciple of your ego or a disciple of your guru?" I thought that was a very funny way to put it. But this is also why you have to check carefully and trust the teacher. Really trust the teacher, right? This is why I said it's a very intimate. And even, whether you spend a lot of time with the teacher or just a little bit of time, once you go and ask for advice, right? Because actually, think about it this way too. This is actually an interesting point. A truly fully qualified Mahayana, Vajrayana teacher, right? If their advice always accords with what your ego is telling you to do, then they must not be a good teacher, right? Because your ego's gotten you in trouble since beginningless time, right? It's been the cause of all your suffering. So, in other words, when you establish that relationship at the beginning, and actually, I'll share this. Yeah, I'm going off on a little bit of tangents, but I think it's good. Actually, I remember this one time. I read. Oh, well, actually, okay, no. I remember early on I was studying with a teacher, Geshe Lobsang Jampa, a great teacher from Ganden Monastery, and every time I would go see him, he would give me a present. He was always giving me some little thing, I don't know, a picture of a deity or some blessed pill or cord with a blessing, something. He was always doing that. And I thought, oh, he really likes me. This is wonderful. I'm really good. He must really think I'm a wonderful student. And I'm really. And then I remember I started reading in the teaching, and it said, and it was advice to teachers. It was like a sutra or something, or not a sutra. It was like a commentary. And it said, it said in this commentary, advice to teachers. It said, when you have real beginners, who are not very good students yet, and who are very immature, give them a lot of presents because they're so immature that they won't follow the teachings unless you baby them essentially. And it said, when they move up a little bit and become more advanced, then you don't need to do that anymore because that would actually build up their ego essentially. And I was like, oh wow! I was really oh darn! I thought I was doing really well, and actually, aside, I'm not yet even, whatever. I'm still, he's babying me. Then after that, a little while after that, he stopped giving me presents, and I was like, oh, I graduated above the present. Good. It was very funny. But, but my point is so at the beginning, there was he was so gentle, but then there came, I'm sharing a story. So then there came a point, I remember, I knew when I was in college, actually, and then I was graduating college, and I went to him and I said, I'm thinking about, after graduation, to go do a long retreat. And And he kind of made a face like he didn't look pleased with the idea. And I thought, a monk and a lama's not pleased. I want to do a retreat. They should, I would think he'd think it's so wonderful, right? And then he said, "What are you going to meditate on?" Like I said, maybe for a year. And he said, "What are you going to do for a year?" Like he was like, "You don't know any teachings. Like, what are you going to do for a whole year? You don't know what you're doing, And I was like, well, really? Like I thought, I was like, I took some classes, and he was like, he's kind of like, shut, like it's not going to work, and my point is actually, like, I'll say this too, like, I'm sharing my own experience, like, my experience with qualified teachers is they've or at least for me, they've always told me things I didn't want to hear, like, not always, but many, many times. When I say, I think I want to do this, oftentimes they said, like, pointed out flaws in my thinking, or advised something that was different than what my ego was saying. And so you have to have a lot of trust, is my point, right? Like, if you're going to really establish that kind of relationship because the goal, in a way, is to overcome your ego, right? And he says that it's like, I remember, actually, at the beginning of discovering, I shouldn't talk so much about myself, but I am today. I remember early on in discovering Buddhism, I had to have a surgery, like a back surgery. And I did a ton of research, right, about, finding a good surgeon. But then I remember even at the time thinking, well, it's much more important to find a qualified teacher, because the qualified teacher is like a surgeon, right? They're going in, they're through their advice, through their guidance, they're like doing surgery on your soul or something. I don't know, I'm using a metaphor here, So you really want to choose carefully, right? Because in other words, if you're choosing, first of all, if the teacher always is going to tell you what you want, right, then they're not helping you, right? Whether they challenge you by saying you should do, either that you can do more than you think, or they challenge you by saying you're not as great as you thought you were, or whatever. Their job is to correct your mistakes. Right? So you have to have a lot of basis for trust. Right? So so I'm just saying that's really, so this was worth thinking about that, right? Because what's also a big mistake, right, would be to so I say this, like, what you don't want to do, right, is establish that kind of relationship, and then when they tell you something you don't want, not to be prepared, and then to sort of get angry at them and blame them for trying to help you, right? That'd be like, if the surgery I had was successful, imagine if I got mad, well, you cut me. Well, it was I hired him. I was paying the surgeon to cut me. You're establishing, very precisely, of course, and you're establishing the relation, and if I said, I had pain after in recovery, well, that's the idea, In other words, that the process of transformation is not always, actually, however much ego you have, that's how much, there's going to be something to go against that. Does that make sense? And so you should also be prepared, or if you're not prepared for that, then then hopefully you find somebody who's going to give you a lot of presents, but that can't go on forever, or you're not going to make progress, right? Whereas eventually they have to say, something that challenges your sense of self, as it's been before. So does that all make sense? I'm just sharing like some reflections. It's a little bit off on that tangent, but I think it's useful, isn't it? Does that help them? Okay. Actually, I'll pause before I can go on and say more about. I want to go back to the Data Yoga stuff, but do you have questions up to this point, or should I go on? Okay. So now I want to say a little more. Okay, so I said I would talk a little bit about the benefits of Data Yoga, right? And some of them I can't. Some of them I won't talk about now, but a few I want to talk about. One is. I like Gyumen Khenpo Rinpoche once at the center a long time ago said, he said in Tantra, like everything, right, according to Buddhism, everything that exists is a dependent arising, right? Interdependent and a dependent arising, right? We've already talked about that many times in classes. And what Khenpo Rinpoche said is, Tantra is playing with dependent arising, which I thought was a very profound point, because in one way you say, wow, so playing with dependent arising means playing with, dependent arising is reality, actually, right? So it means playing with reality, right? And so I like sometimes when people say, well, people sometimes will say, well, how can you visualize yourself as a deity when you're not a deity? Or how can you, and so on. Again, what Yume Kensei Rinpoche said, which I thought was very profound. One is he said it was playing with pen arising. Another he said, of course you're not a deity. It's a skillful means. It's a skillful method, right, for transformation. Whereas it's not a delusion. You don't literally think that'd be stupid, right? Like, you think, oh, now, if you actually deny the conventional reality, that would just be psychosis, not a skillful method. The idea is this is a skillful means. And so let's talk a little about, so what's skillful about that? So sometimes, first of all, in Buddhism, in Tantric Buddhism, sometimes they call it using the result in the path. Does that make sense? So I want to go through a number of different things. So first of all, think about it this way, right? Like if you visualize yourself as Tara, right? Now, first of all, Tara is the expression of wisdom, understanding, emptiness, right? And then who is Tara? Tara is the female Bodhisattva of active compassion, right? Of compassion to benefit others in the world, who transforms the world for the benefit of others, right? So there are many levels of psychology. Again, there are too many to even talk about, but I just want to give a few, right? So one is, if you're walking around thinking, visualizing or imagining that your wisdom, understanding, emptiness has arisen as Tara as you're interacting with people, right? Then one benefit immediately, right, is when you're interacting with people, you think, well, what would Tara do? Right? In other words, certainly Tara is the mother of all beings who wants everyone to get enlightened and who treats everyone like her own precious child, right? So if you're doing deity yoga of Tara, right, and then somebody at work says something offensive to you, right, what are you going to do? So that's one, right? In other words, you can see how, in terms of renunciation, right, that deity yoga helps to decrease, right? In other words, you have ordinary reactions, but you're practicing deity yoga, so you're saying, okay, so the ordinary pattern would be to get angry at this person. But actually Tara wants to enlighten. It wants them to have their highest good and be happy, and have compassion for them. So one is that, right, is by doing deity yoga, it helps transform your interactions, right? That's actually a fairly superficial benefit, but that's a real benefit, actually, right? You can see how that would be, right? Another benefit is if you're integrating your understanding of emptiness, right? Because in other words, Tara is empty of inherent existence, and it's also and somehow her appearance, right, is emptiness, the wisdom, understanding, emptiness appearing as a deity, right? So think about it this way now, right? Like, ordinary, because the enemy, actually in Tantra there are two obstacles: ordinary appearances and ordinary concepts. So you're transforming those into extraordinary or divine appearances, right, the visualization, and divine concepts. But the idea there, in part, is that you're integrating the understanding of emptiness into everything, right? So, in other words, that's hard to do. So in this case, you can see how it's a very skillful method, right, for somebody, especially somebody who's not, who's interacting with the world a lot, like most of us here are doing. Right? Because the idea now, right, is that as soon as you have your ordinary appearance of your office, right, or your home, right, it's this appearance of inherent existence is there, right? And then there's all kinds of afflictive, right? There's a sense of clinging and grasping, and then there's aversion, and so on, right? Whereas, we've got over that in other classes, right? How the appearance of inherent existence, the ignorance, grasping, and inherent existence, gives rise to all these afflictive emotions. So in deity yoga, right, what you're doing is, it's a very powerful method of a number of things. One is, so you're integrating your understanding of emptiness into all these different experiences, right? So when you're putting on your clothes, right, you're dissolving the clothes, you're recognizing that the ordinary appearance of your clothes is an appearance of inherent existence. The clothes are empty of inherent existence, right? And then you're visualizing them as divine silks or something, right? But do you see the point there? In other words, you're integrating your understanding of emptiness into clothing, right? And when you eat, right, if you're when you're an ordinary person, right, and you pick up your, right, like, it's like there's this appearance of there's an inherently existent tea that's my tea, right? And there's me, and inherently existent me, and inherently existent tea, and I want it. Right? But now you're transforming that, right? So you're imagining okay, I'm Tara, right? The expression of wisdom and compassion. And actually, if you have the ordinary appearance of tea, right, the enemy in Tantra is ordinary appearance, right? So you recognize, wow, that ordinary appearance is based on parts, for example, right? And then I'm labeling tea. It's merely labeled, totally empty of being tea from its own side, right? There's no tea in the water. I mean, the water itself is not tea, right? Cardboard is not tea. Even the molecules of tea, none of those molecules, right, or the atoms are not, none of those atoms are tea, right? But when they're appearing in a certain configuration, then it's labeled correctly. You know, it's a conventional appearance, a conventional label. But there's no tea existing from its own side, so it dissolves, right? When you recognize that, then your ordinary appearance of tea dissolves, right? So then you imagine, like in Tara's case, like it's called a jewel vase filled with nectar. Right? And then you think, okay, right, I'm drinking the jeweled nectar, Tara's blissful jeweled nectar, right? Then it's an expression of the understanding of emptiness. See what I'm getting at there? So now you're integrating emptiness into everything, right? You know, you get in your car, right? You dissolve the ordinary appearance of the car, and you, I don't know, what would Tara drive in? You know, divine chariot or something, right? You know, there is a, you know, and other people actually also, right? There is, so like somebody comes along who I usually grasp at, right? But actually I dissolve the appearance of that person, and I imagine that they're also Tara. So do you see how, like, it's, do you see how if you do that, you're integrating the understanding of emptiness into all your experiences? And also, do you see how that's cutting through all the, whereas if you practice this dissolving into emptiness and then arising as pure appearance, you're cutting through, first of all, ignorance, and then also those ordinary, it's a skillful method that cuts through the patterns of grasping, aversion, jealousy. Right, actually, how can you be jealous? If I'm Tara and you're Tara, right, we're both expressions of the wisdom, understanding, emptiness, I can't be jealous of you. Right? If I'm Tara and you're Tara and we're both expressions of the wisdom, understanding, emptiness, I can't hate you. Does that make sense? So do you see how, like, it becomes a skillful method to cut through afflictive emotions? Still, you know, if you're a, I want to point out, like, so then if you're, let's say, I don't know, picking a career, if you're an accountant, right, and you go to work, you know, you do your accounting, right? Like, that's obvious. In other words, you're not, you know, again, like, you're not crazy. You're not saying, oh, I'm Tara, so I'm just going to sit like this or something, or sit like this, you know, and like let my boss be happy, right? In other words, the point is that, like, externally, you act ordinary, right? That's the point of in Tantra. Whereas you act like a normal, however you normally act, and you do, and you be responsible, and you be kind, and you be a good person. But internally, you're training your mind, right, to integrate this understanding of emptiness and pure appearance into things. Does that make sense? So, like, and then I want to say one other thought here, right? There's another, there are a number of other benefits. I want to say what they are. Another benefit is this, is taking the result as the path, right? So then also you think, what does Tara do? Right? What do Bodhisattva, what do Buddhas, actually Tara is a Buddha, right? What do Buddhas do, right? Well, Buddhas benefit all sentient beings, you know, and they sort of like radiate out light rays and radiate out compassion and transform everything into enlightenment. And, you know, they teach and they explain and they enlighten others, right? So, you know, when you're actually interacting with other people, if you're doing deity yoga, right, then you're trying to benefit them, right? That makes sense. There's, what else would Tara do, right? And then if you don't have somebody to interact with and you're just chilling out, right, well then, like, this is the point, like, ordinarily, right, let's say, so I gave the example, so let's say you're at work and you're interacting with people, so you're thinking, okay, I'm Tara, and you're trying to benefit them, right, and you're thinking about emptiness. Then you come home and you're all tired out from a hard day of work and driving in traffic, okay? So you lay down, and actually I think Lama Yeshe talked about it, he said ordinary people, like, they lay down, oh, you know, like that. He said, but if you're doing deity yoga, you still lay down, right, you're still an ordinary, doing your ordinary activity, but then you, instead of saying, I just need to escape, so I'm going to put on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills on it over there. Like, you know, like the person who's practicing deity yoga maybe would lay down and think, okay, I'm Tara laying down. So what does Tara do when she lays down? She radiates light rays and transforms the universe into bliss. Right? So you're still chilling out, like the appearance is still like, you know, but then you're imagining that, right? So you're imagining sending out light rays, and you're imagining, like, because you're Tara, right, that like everyone's your child, right? And so you love them, and then you're transforming their experiences into bliss, and you're radiating love to them, and so on. So do you see how it's like, training your mind, right? That's all this is doing. But you see how effectively that is. And then also there's like very powerful, so you imagine that those light rays hit them and they become Tara. And they get totally blissed out, right? So that's another benefit. It's like this way of like, that those visualizations are unique to Tantra, right? There is a, Bodhisattvas cultivate compassion, and then Tantric Bodhisattvas cultivate compassion. But you see the difference? Like the non-Tantric Bodhisattva, right, when they got home from work, would lay down and think, may all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. That's beautiful, right? The Tantric Bodhisattva would think that same thing, but they would also have this visualization. I'm Tara, I'm laying on a lotus, which is an expression of emptiness. And I'm sending out light rays, which are an expression of emptiness and great bliss. And they're illuminating all beings and enlightening. So they're both, you see what I mean? Like, both bodhisattvas are cultivating love and compassion, but there's this skillful method there in the Tantric Bodhisattva of integrating emptiness into it, first of all, right? And then, for example, in that case, the light rays is also unique. And I want to say one other benefit while we have time, because I think this one's interesting too, right? Do you guys remember, like, for those of you who were here in the class on the spiritual teacher, right? Because Tantra is very connected to Guru Yoga. So I want to, for those of you who were here in that module, remember what we talked about, what's the word? In karma, right? The teachings on karma, there are different, they call like fields of merit, right? And that, remember we talked about how like, for the person, like for oneself, you know, for example, doing something out of devotion or refuge or love or compassion is a positive sign regardless because of the motivation, but then the object of that can make it more or less powerful, right? So like, they give examples in the teachings on karma, like, for example, if you give $10 to somebody, you know, out of generosity, that's a positive karma. But if you give those $10 to somebody who's starving, that's a more powerful positive karma than if you give it to somebody who has plenty, you're just trying to be nice to them, right? Because you're saving the person's life, maybe. You know, so that's more powerful. Right? And then also there are certain karmic relationships that make things more powerful, right? So like, you give the example that like for example, your own mother or father, you know, for example, are a more powerful karmic object than somebody else's mother or father because they were kind to you and brought you up and whatever, gave you your, at least at the minimum, they gave you your body in this life, right? So there's a relationship for this lifetime there. But actually, we know that on some level, right? Like in other words, you know, after somebody's parent has died, right? You know, you can see, I mean, there's something in one's heart if one felt good about what one did or one felt like, you know, harsh. It gives one peace or not peace in one's heart. So anyway, that's a karmic relationship. And anyway, so then in the teachings they say that, you know, like arhats arhats are very powerful, but then bodhisattvas are more powerful karmic objects, then Buddhas are more powerful. But they say for the individual person, your own, actually, so this is in the teachings on karma, the person who's leading you to enlightenment, so you're like your teacher, for you is a very powerful karmic object. Does that make sense? Because they're just like, you know, if we said the person who was kind to you, well, they're very kind to you because they're guiding you to enlightenment. So then, according to the teachings on karma, and actually it's interesting because let's say somebody is Mike's teacher but not my teacher, right? Well, then Mike's creating that karma by giving it to them. But they, like, let's say that Mike helps that person. Mike would create a lot more good karma helping that person than I would. If it was, like, let's say, I don't know, if there was some Tibetan Lama and you were helping them, but they weren't my teacher, they were yours, and then you helped them, and like you would, we were both helping them. You'd be creating a lot more positive karma because they were your teacher and not mine, right? So I'd still be creating positive karma if I thought, oh, I like them, and I want to help them, but yours would be more powerful because of the karmic connection. Just like if me and you were helping a parent, you know, that whoever's parent it was would get more benefit. Does that make sense? So it's a relationship. The point is, part of karma is your relationship to the other. So that now, that's all a preface to say. So now, I said earlier, right? If I'm visualizing myself, I took the initiation, let's say, of White Tara from Dalai Lama, right? Now I'm visualizing myself as White Tara, I'm thinking I'm non-dual from the Dalai Lama, in essence. I know I'm a different person than him, but the essence of the wisdom, understanding, emptiness is kind of non-dual, not two. Right? And then, and so I think, like, I'm White Tara, I'm the result, you know, I'm the result time Buddha, the same as, not different from the Dalai Lama, right? So the point is it becomes quite, this is another way, I'm just pointing out, like, karmically, that if you practice that way, right, it becomes, I'll say actually, like, how do I say this? Like, if you had the chance to offer the Dalai Lama lunch, it would be a very precious, you'd feel like, wow, Dalai Lama lunch, and like, how cool, you know? But like, from a karmic perspective, if you practice deity yoga, you can offer the Dalai Lama lunch every day. Because you're visualizing yourself in that way, and you're offering right? You could offer the Dalai Lama in your heart, or you can think I'm the result time Dwight Tara, I'm offering it. It's a karmic, again, like, remember how I said earlier, Kenshin said it's playing with dependent arising, right? So what it's doing is you're finding skillful methods to create more powerful positive karma while you're doing your ordinary activities, right? So it's, because remember, karma is by motivation, right? It's by your thought. It's not, there was like, we said that before, right? Somebody could build a whole hospital if they're doing it just to, like, become famous. That's not a positive karma at all, right? The external action looks positive, but if the person's heart is not positive, it's not, right? So in this case, I just want to point out, like, you can be doing tiny things, right? Like, but you're doing it with the perfect motivation, right? You're saying for the, like, so I want to give an example. Let's say a person's practicing Tantra. So, like, imagine, so I'm going to go through 3 different levels, right? An ordinary person washes their face in the morning, right, and brushes their teeth, right? So that person actually, right, what's their karmic motivation? Actually, not, that person's like, oh, maybe the person say, oh, I have to get up for work, I'm tired, I don't really want to do this, okay, I better go, okay, I'm gonna, I gotta get to work, or I won't, my boss will be mad at me, they brush their teeth and they hurry up, and I gotta do it fast, so I go, right? So first of all, like, from a karmic perspective, is there any positive karma at all? No, none, right? Like, because that's either a neutral karma or a negative, it depends on depends. In one way, there's like attachment to this life, so you can say it's negative, or another, it's neutral, if the person just sort of wasn't thinking, but just did it out of routine, right? But there's no positive karma at all, right? Then, like, next level, now I want to do a Bodhisattva, right, who's not practicing Tantra, their experience of that, right? So they get up and they think, I want to be of benefit to all beings. Today I have the opportunity, I'm grateful for this opportunity to work and interact with others. I want to be of help to others. And, if I look all dirty and smelly, I'm not going to be very, I'll actually disturb others' minds. So out of kindness to them, I'm going to wash my face and brush my teeth. And then I want to go out and help others, right? So then that becomes a powerful, right? And I'm brushing my teeth for the sake of all sentient beings or something, right? That's a positive karma, right? It's done with the positive motivation of compassion. But now, let's say a tantric practitioner, right, wakes up. So I'm going to give, why don't you just, if you understand karma, you'll understand what if karma is not familiar to you, it'll be hard to get to. So if you're familiar a little bit with karma, so tantric practitioner, actually, they're asleep, right? Actually, as they wake up, they imagine, if you're white tar, right, so you'd imagine, what's it called? The divine goddesses are ringing bells, waking you up. Because you're in a, again, you're Tara, right? You're in a pure land. And you get up from your lotus, your bed that's in the form, that's visualized in the form of a lotus with a moon cushion. That's an expression of emptiness, right? Of wisdom, understanding emptiness, right? And then you think, right? This is divine pride and pure appearance, right? So you have the appearance, you visualize, okay, I'm like Tara, I'm the result time, non-dual from the Dalai Lama. And so then you think, now imagine, like, right, we actually in ordinary Buddhism, not ordinary, non-tantric Buddhism, sometimes there are rituals where you pour water over the Buddha and so on, right? Like you offer water to the Buddha. So sometimes you see that in it's called Vietnamese temples. Right? It's very special. You can drive all the way to the temple and you do that. Right? The tantric practitioner, right, they're saying, okay, so I'm the result time. I'm white Tara, non-dual from the Dalai Lama. Now I'm going to go wash, right? So now what they're washing, so they're thinking, I'm offering water to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to White Tara, or non-dual, right? Like, this is my water offering to result time guru. Visualize, self-visualization, right? And they're brushing their teeth, they think, I'm brushing the Dalai Lama's teeth, I'm brushing in the form of White Tara. Right? And her teeth are empty, right? Are an expression of emptiness, of the wisdom understanding emptiness. Her every being, she doesn't have the light that she's made of is an expression of compassion, right? And so it's like compassionate wisdom is offering to compassionate wisdom for the sake of all sentient beings. Do you get the difference of the karmic? It's like a different. First of all, again, like there's still when the person looks in the mirror, they see whatever, like their hair is messy and their whatever. But the mind is different, right? And the mind is what determines karma. And so this idea of playing with dependent arising is creating certain causes to bring about certain results, right? Especially, what's the result of that? What will be the karma? I'm not sure exactly, but try to imagine it. What's the karmic result if every day you think if your karma, like your motivation is, you're integrating wisdom, right? with your actions, understanding emptiness. Right? So first of all, if you don't integrate wisdom, right, then you're creating more samsara. Right? When you integrate wisdom to the best of your ability, you're creating the cause to end your samsara. Right? So one, you're creating cause of samsara. The other, you're creating cause to end samsara. Right? And then I don't know, what's the benefit? What's the karmic results of thinking every day, as you wash your face, as you wash your hands, as you take a shower, that you're offering all of that? And again, can you imagine that? Actually, just according to, since the karma is in the mind, it would be this. Imagine what the karma would be if every day you were the Dalai Lama's attendant, who, offered him lunch, offered him shower, offered him whatever, the water. Right? Like if you looked at that person, if we looked at that person, we'd say, "Wow, what a cool life they get to." This is the skillful means. This is part of the skillful means of tantra. Is you're creating that kind again because karma is in the mind. Does that make sense? Ordinary, we usually think so much externally. Like we think in an extroverted way, so we don't recognize that really it is. In other words, you can, like I was saying earlier, two people can be laying down on the sofa like that, whatever. But it's in the mind that determines what the karma is of that. And so there are all different things you can be doing with your mind, right? One person can be laying there thinking, I hate my boss, right? They're creating a very heavy negative karma, hatred. Somebody else could be laying there thinking of compassion. But if you're doing the deity yoga practice, the idea here is that because you're integrating what? Bodhicitta, the wisdom, understanding, emptiness, and guru yoga, and then pure appearance, right, into that experience, that there's no faster, because what makes it fast to get enlightened, actually, right? Actually, the whole point is what makes it fast is causes and effects, dependent arising. Right? Everything is dependent arising in Buddhism, right? So the idea here is, going back to what Khyentse Rinpoche said, right? You're playing with dependent arising, right? So what you're doing in a way is you're saying, you're taking this ordinary experience, right? And you're taking the essence of it by using all these skillful aspects of your mental training to create causes that will bring about the best possible results, right? And what are the causes that bring about the best results? Wisdom, understanding, emptiness, bodhicitta, guru, yoga, right? And so you're integrating those into all these ordinary activities. So it becomes a very fast method. Because actually, I'll say one other thing, and then I'll open up to questions again. I noticed that, if you listen sometimes, when they putting aside tantra in general, but sometimes when Lama Zopa Rinpoche teaches, he'll say two different things at different times because they're both so important. When he talks about what causes somebody to progress quickly to enlightenment, right? Putting aside tantra, and he says one is the power of their compassion. Right? The more compassionate somebody is, the faster they'll become enlightened. The less compassionate is, the less quickly they'll become enlightened. At other times, if you ask them the question, he'll say, it's their relationship to their teacher. Right? In other words, how because the teacher is undermining their ego and so on, right? So the more they skillfully relate to that and allow that surgery to take place, the faster they'll progress, right? So in other words, there are two different answers. One would be the level of compassion you have, or the other is your level of devotion, say. Which just means letting the procedure happen, right? Letting the surgery in your soul happen, whatever. So Tantra integrates those two into every activity, right? Compassion and guru yoga, along with the wisdom, understanding, emptiness. So I'm just sharing a few. There's more to the skillful methods, but I want to at least share a few. So those are a few benefits of why you would bother to do that practice. But again, you can see it's not. You have to be pretty well trained in the preliminaries. You can't do that. I just want to pause. If people have comments or questions.
Okay, so what do you need if you everything's about cause and effect? So what do you need bodhicitta for? I mean, because if you can visualize I'm a deity, and then if you can visualize myself as a deity, then the other person as a deity, I mean, then I'm creating cause to be that deity. Then, so why do I need compassion?
So
Bodhicitta. I mean.
yeah. So he's asking, why do you need bodhicitta?
Yeah.
So the real issue is this: first of all, so in terms of cause and effect, right? So bodhicitta is actually the main Actually, yeah, okay, so actually there's two. One is, actually, so you, in terms of cause, right? Bodhicitta, the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings, is the main cause of the result, right, which is Buddhahood. You can't, and they say, well, you can't attain the Buddha's omniscient mind without bodhicitta, and also you can't achieve the form body of the Buddha. You know, those different bodies that the Buddha emanates to benefit others, like the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya, right, the enjoyment body and the emanation body. And so, so first of all, like there is if you don't have bodhicitta, you don't have the main cause that brings the main result. So, like in a way, like bodhicitta, if you think of, I'm saying the main cause. Like so think of it this way, right? If you have I'll use a metaphor for a minute, okay? Imagine if you you want to grow corn, right? Like so, the main cause to grow corn would be a corn seed, right? Like the seeds. You can't grow corn without corn seeds, right? So you have to have the seeds, right? And then, like, let's say you do have corn seeds, right? Now, one thing you can do is just take a bunch of corn seeds and throw them out your backyard. Probably none will ever grow, right? Second thing you can do is you could plant them very carefully in a cornfield, right? And then they will grow, right? Hopefully, if the weather's okay. Or then the third option, right? You could take the corn seeds into like a what do you call it? A greenhouse, right? And you could create the perfect conditions for corn to grow. Does that make sense? Those are three different options, right? If you have corn seeds, right? Like throw them around and they don't do anything. Plant them in a cornfield at the right time of year and they'll grow slowly. Or put them in like a greenhouse, right? And then you can grow them all year round and you can grow them more quickly because you can control all the water and in a greenhouse you can control exactly the right amount of water, exactly the right amount of sunlight and so on, right? So what I'm getting at is bodhicitta is actually the main seed. Does that make sense? It's like the corn seed of your Buddhahood. Like, so to give this metaphor, like if you, I'm using my metaphor here now, if the non-tantric path is like planting that corn seed in the cornfield, and then it'll grow gradually, right? Tantra, this deity yoga method, is like planting the corn seed in the greenhouse. Does that make sense? But you still need the seed, even if you have the perfect greenhouse, right? Like you're visualizing deities and visualizing things. It's like having the greenhouse with no seed. You see what I mean? You have this great greenhouse. You imagine if you have like a really cool greenhouse with all the technology, and you can open and close the windows, and you have the irrigation system. But if you have no seeds, nothing will grow in that greenhouse, even if you have an awesome greenhouse. Does that make sense? So it's like that. Like, in other words, the seed is actually the main cause. So the main thing is still bodhicitta. Otherwise, you won't get the result of Buddhahood. And so let's say, I'll give another one. Like Atisha actually has pointed out. He said, he pointed out in Tibet there were people who did deity yoga practice like that, but who didn't have bodhicitta. There were, and Atisha said, somebody came to Atisha and said, oh, this person Atisha was able to see through his clairvoyance, maybe, or somebody told him, I can't remember which. But there was a person who was doing deity yoga practice but didn't have bodhicitta. Does that make sense? But they did understand emptiness, and so they became an arhat. They achieved just their own liberation, but they didn't become a Buddha to benefit others because they didn't have the cause of Buddhahood. Does that make sense? They did the deity yoga and they meditated on emptiness, but they didn't have bodhicitta, so they didn't achieve Buddhahood then. The practice, because they didn't have the right seed, it didn't bring that result of Buddhahood. It brought some other result, right? And then Atisha said that was so sad, right? Because if they had had bodhicitta, they could have become fully enlightened for others. And then he said other people who practice deity yoga will only achieve lower rebirths. Because it's the motivation that determines, right? So Atisha was pointing out, let's say somebody, he gave the example, I think there are examples like this where somebody was practicing deity yoga just to, people do this sometimes. Like there are some deity yoga practices like, where people do it in order to get wealth, right? And they just do it, I want to be rich. Well, actually, they're creating the cause. Like, so they're doing deity yoga, they're visualizing deity, but their motivation is greed, right? So actually, their result will be, Atisha was pointing out, their result will be a bad karma, actually. It will be like rebirth in the lower realm. So it's still the motivation is the main seed, and the deity yoga practice is sort of like the greenhouse that makes that seed grow faster and bigger. But if you have the wrong seed, you're still going to get the wrong result. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question or no?
Yeah. But you still accumulate those conditions. You still accumulated the possibility to become a deity.
Yeah, although actually, I'll show one other story. That there's a story, I forget where this story came from, but there was somebody who did deity yoga practice, and they sometimes there are deities who look kind of wrathful, and they look fierce, And of course, the real idea of Buddhism is that they're supposed to be fiercely against the ego, is the whole point, right? Whereas that's why they're fierce, is they're fierce in destroying their own and others' egotism, as you were saying earlier. But this person practiced that, but they got like, what's the word? Without bodhicitta, with self-centeredness, with selfishness. And then they took rebirth as an evil spirit, but they looked like if somebody had a vision, somebody could see spirits, and they said, I just saw this evil spirit, but it looked just like this deity, because the person had visualized very well, but their motivation was, I want to be powerful. They were like visualizing some fierce-looking form, but their ego was there, wanting power, not wanting compassion. So they took rebirth in that. So there's a danger, whereas it's not necessarily. So they ended up being an evil spirit that looked like the external form looked like the deity, but there wasn't no good result at all actually for them. So that's the danger of that, is the wrong motivation. You see, and there's a danger. You can see that there was that fierce. I'm giving an example. You see some of these images of fierce deities. I don't know if we have some here, but some of the Tibetan deities look very fierce. But you can see how that if the person is using that to the fierceness against egotism, then it makes sense, right? But you can see how, if you don't have really good bodhicitta, you think, fierce against your enemies, for example, right? Well, then that result is terrible, right? That's just hatred, And maybe the person deceives themselves and thinks, oh no, I'm doing this for love, but deep in their heart is anger and hate. Well, then they take a bad result, actually. So the point is that it doesn't necessarily, without compassion and bodhicitta, it doesn't necessarily lead to Buddhahood. It can lead to a negative result if you have a wrong motivation. Does that answer?
No, yeah, good.
Yeah. So that's another danger in Tantra. Is like I was saying earlier, sometimes it could be the anger, or sometimes it could be again, if you're doing the Tara practice, and again, if you're thinking, I'm offering this bath to Tara and the Guru, and that's positive karma, right? But if you start thinking, well, yeah, so I'm you can see how people distort it. Somebody could start. Or I'm not talking about in an extreme way, but you can see how somebody could distort it and start saying, well, yeah, then in that case, I should eat more of whatever I want. I should do whatever I want. I should have more fun and have more pleasure. And they start grasping and doing more and more. They think, well, it's for Tara, but they're not really doing it with a compassionate motivation and with renunciation. Well, then it becomes a problem. Actually, that's not a positive one.
So if you do let's say you do a visualization, but you don't have a teacher, so do you get let's say a bad result?
If you don't take the initiation or something?
Yeah, you do it, you say, you read and then you try to do it yourself, but you don't have a teacher,
Yeah, I think if you don't take, what's the way to say it? I'm not sure what the result would be of that, but but actually in the teachings themselves, what they say is that that should be it'll be a bad result, not a positive result.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's not to say, I want to clarify though, whereas if you have devotion to Tara, let's say, or Avalokitesh for the Buddha of Compassion, you pray them, that's positive, it's nothing. But actually, I'll say this, so that's different. But that's not Tantra. That's just praying to Tara. That's fine. She's a compassionate. If you think, may all beings be happy. That's positive. But I guess my point is this: if the teachings say, think of it this way before we start. If it's clear, right, that the lineage and the teachings say, if you want to practice deity yoga of White Tara, then take the initiation of White Tara and do the practice, according to the instructions of your teacher and the lineage, right? And then if you say, well, I don't need that. I'm just going to read a book and I'm going to do it myself, right? You can see already there's pride, right? I'm just saying, if you think about it, or if you introspect, you can see that person already is having some pride. Well, I don't need a teacher, and I can do it my own, and that already there's pride there, right? And then what happens if somebody already has pride, and then they're going to do a practice like that, it's going to probably increase their pride. So it's dangerous then, I think, without in some instructions from a teacher. So I think that's why it's quite important.
Because sometimes, some books you read, even the sutra, you see, that if you break the samaya, this is going to happen, this is going to happen.
Yeah, so I think it's not a good...
How are you going to get motivated to practice Tantra when you read
Oh, you mean if you
Yeah, if you do this, to take the vows, this and this.
Oh,
That's
okay.
why I was basing it on that.
I see.
So if you take the vows, this is going to happen, this is going to happen.
I guess I'll just answer quickly, and then we'll get into more next time. But I guess I'll say this: first of all, next time we're going to cover there are 4 different classes of Tantra. So in the lower two classes of Tantra, you only take the Bodhisattva vow, you don't take Tantric vows, so that's a different thing too. So not all Tantra do you have to take Tantric vows, so that's one. That's part answer. But then the other part of the answer, I guess, is this, which we'll talk about more of the 4 classes of Tantra next time. There are different levels of Tantras that have different methods. They all include deity yoga, so that's why they wanted to start with that today. But then we'll go through the 4 classes. So one is you don't always have to take vows to do that. But then the other is this, if you have, this is, I guess, the importance of why it is important to have a teacher and take the initiation, is that, yes, people make mistakes. In other words, the goal, I mean, nobody's, at the beginning, we're not perfect, so we do make mistakes. Like you're saying, you can take vows and not be perfect at them and make mistakes, and that's normal. But I want to say, too, like that Tantra also has, like Vajrasattva, for example, which you're familiar with, it comes from Tantra, actually, that there are powerful methods to purify those. And so that's where I think, like, my experience was, if you have a teacher, right, then also they know about that, and they'll say, okay, you took the vow, so on. Now, that's why actually oftentimes people do retreats of Vajrasattva, or there are many other practices in Tantra for purifying the samayas and the vows. So the idea is that you're not going to be perfect at the beginning, but if you do your best, and then you do those retreats, and then or those practices a little bit, and then you do your best again, then you do those practices, then you get better and better at that. So the idea is that you can fix that, you can purify it, as long as you have, as long as your motivation's good to start with, and you choose the teacher carefully, then that you can fix, actually. It's like you do your best, but that's why people do. That's why, for example, before doing all the teachings say, like before doing like really long tantric retreats or certain ones, or even not very long ones, but they'll sometimes say, we'll do Vajrasattva practice first, or there's other practice, Samaya Vajra, or Akshobhya practice, or different, that purify those things. Because there's a recognition in the tradition that people aren't perfect, we make mistakes, but there are ways to purify that. Okay, we should stop, but we'll go more into that next time when we talk about the 4 classes of Tantra. But let's just dedicate any positive karma we've created. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And in this snowy mountain paradise, you, the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chinrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara.